kind of the decision I've come to based on a couple factors. I think we're going to vote on the longitudinal data bill on tomorrow. Like we are going to meet tomorrow at 3:30. Can you? Yeah, I mean, with our snow day, it just made it to where, and part of that is I wanted to make sure everybody had all the testimony. We had it all printed, but we had an upload issue, some buttons that weren't clicked, and so now they are. Everything is on the S drive and everything is on the website. So please give Rose a round of applause. She's doing a great job. Great job. Appreciate it, appreciate it, appreciate it. It is a detailed work, very much so. So thank you for that. Because of that, just making sure everybody has time that if there is an amendment needed for that bill, or maybe you don't like it and there's not going to be an amendment that makes you like it, that's okay. We are going to work that tomorrow, the aligned bill. And this one that we hear today, depending on how the hearing goes, will the committee, there'd be space to work that tomorrow as well. And the only other thing that could be added to tomorrow is we got what we voted on unanimously to partner with the State School Board of Education to equalize their pay with our pay. And that had to go into bill form. We voted it into the budget, but it needed to go into bill form, so it stood in statute as that's how they get paid, and that's on a daily rate rather than the salary. So ours is on a salary now. Theirs has to be built into their daily per diem rate. And so this language does that. We can review that tomorrow, go over that tomorrow, and then we would need to vote it out on Monday because that's our last day. Because I always like to not hear it and vote on it right away. So that would give the weekend, so we could get some things done tomorrow and Monday be our last day to vote stuff out before turnaround votes start on Tuesday through Thursday. Representative McNorton.
Yeah, do you have that bill number, or is it a?
It's 2303 is a line. Oh, the state board?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll give it to you guys because it should be posted here pretty soon because it just got read in. It is 2382, House Bill 2382, if you want to go look for it.
Thank you.
It's a pretty short one pager. And we will, if research and revisers, if it gets to us, we'd like to hear that tomorrow, and I think we can. And I don't think it would take all that long either. So I think we can do quite a bit tomorrow in an hour from 3:30 to 4:30 and get everybody home for the weekend. So with that, today's project is House Bill 2320, an act concerning education, and I will let Nick come up and go over that for us, and then we have one proponent oral and one neutral oral, and we'll go through the packet that you have with you of everything printed that you can start to look at. Thank you, Nick.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, committee. So committee, brief overview, and then we'll get into the details. So House Bill 2320, this would amend current law to authorize specific to children that are in the custody of the Secretary for Children and Families, so foster care students. This would allow them to enroll and attend any school district in the state if it's in the child's best interests. It would require the timely transfer of student records when a child's placement is changed. And it would also authorize a student to continue to and remain in this child's school of origin. And then finally, with regard to that school of origin, it would require a transportation plan when that child is maintained in the school of origin. And we'll get into each one of these as I proceed. So the first part, one of the primary portions of the bill is to authorize children who are in foster care to attend any school district in the state. So this occurs in sections 2 and 3 of the bill. So specifically, this is amending the attendance statutes with regard to where a student resides, and then also with regard to open enrollment for non-resident student attendance. So these are KSA 723122 and 723123. So first, let me get into what current law says for attendance based on residency. So in 723122, this is the statute that provides for attendance based on a child's residence. This statute currently provides that a child shall be able to attend school in the school district where the child lives, if that child lives with a resident of the school district, if that child was placed in the school district by the secretary or a court, and then also where the child lives if the child is a homeless child. So what this bill is doing is it would amend this statute. First off, it would amend this statute to authorize a child to attend school in any school district if the Secretary for Children and Families determines that such enrollment and attendance is in the best interests of that child. So that's number one, the child can attend any school district in the state without regard to the student's residence. Additionally, this bill would clarify that a child shall be authorized to attend the school district if the child lives with a resident of the school district, if the child lives, resides, or is staying at a location as a result of placement therein by the secretary, and then lastly, if the child is a homeless child, where that child lives, resides, or is staying. So those children would be authorized to attend school based on that residency or where they're living, where they're staying. Lastly, there's an amendment in this part of the bill that if the child is placed by the secretary across, not to another school district, but simply across a school boundary within the same school district, that such child shall be permitted to enroll in and attend either the corresponding school that corresponds to that placement or remain in the school or the school of origin where that child is coming from. Again, that would be determined by the secretary. Then, it's a corresponding amendment in the open enrollment statute. Generally in this open enrollment statute, this is where non-resident students can attend school district in a school district of non-residents. So generally under current law, if you're a foster care child, this statute does state that a student in foster care can attend a non-resident school district if that child lives in the home of another student who attends a non-resident school district. Otherwise, a foster care student would have to submit an application through the open enrollment application process to attend a non-resident school district. That's current law. So what this bill is doing is it's amending this statute to provide that if there is a child who's in the custody of the Secretary for Children and Families, they shall be permitted to enroll in any school district of the state, like we did in the last amendatory section, or remain in that child's school of origin. So with regard to the placement of these children, so current law generally provides that school districts shall provide transportation under the provisions of current law, if you're 2.5 miles or more from your school, but only if you're a resident of the school district. Otherwise, if you're a non-resident of the school district may provide transportation if they so choose. So what this bill would do is, with regard to children who are in the custody of the Secretary of Children and Families, foster care kids, this would state that if the Secretary changes the placement of a child and makes a determination that it is in the child's best interest to remain in the school of origin, the affected school district or districts and the secretary have to coordinate to develop a transportation plan to get the child to and from the school of origin. So this transportation plan would be required to address the cost of the transportation and how the division and the reimbursement of costs would be between the school districts and the secretary. And then also there's certain considerations that the transportation plan must also take into consideration, such as the age, maturity, and behavioral capacity of the child, the type of transportation that is available, the flexibility of the school schedule, any effects on extracurricular activities, traffic routes and patterns, and then specific to the child, the individualized needs of the child. So that would be in the transportation plan if the child is placed somewhere else but is going to remain in a school of origin. The final thing of this bill, we've talked about the attendance portion, the transportation plan portion. The final thing with this bill regards educational record transfers. So generally, under current law, if a child is transferred due to a change in placement, either by the secretary, a court, or a commissioner of juvenile justice, Current law generally places the obligation and duty to transfer educational records on the secretary or the commissioner who has changed that child's placement. So what this bill does is it would amend 2 statutes to basically change those obligations and duties and put more of an onus upon school districts. So what this bill would do is it would establish that it is the duty of the Secretary of Children and Families to first notify the affected school districts and provide notice that the child's placement is changing. And then this bill would state, specific to foster care children, that the school district then has a duty that once they receive that notice, to cooperate with the secretary and transfer the child's educational records as soon as possible, but not later than 2 business days following receipt of that notice. And then also, there is a provision in this bill that would prohibit any school district from denying a foster care child's enrollment and attendance solely on the basis that the school district does not possess that child's educational records. So that's an amendment within the SINC code, the Children in Need of Care code. This bill also amends a record transfer provision in the statutes regarding special education. So it's in a similar fashion. If a child has an IEP and transfers due to a change in placement by the secretary or a court, it's the same thing would occur. The secretary or court would have a duty to notice the school district, and then the school district would be under the obligation to transfer those records in a timely fashion, but not later than 2 business days following that notice. And Mr. Chair and members of the committee, if enacted, this bill would take effect upon publication in the statute book, which is July 1, 2025, and I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
All right, committee, this is doing quite a bit. Questions around for Nick of what this is doing. Representative Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation, Nick. As I recall, in our open enrollment statutes, we put a provision in there that prior to accepting a student, they could be considered a student not in good standing. There's no provision like that in this bill that I saw. Is that contrary to or different than our open enrollment statute?
So this does amend the open enrollment statute, and that provision you are referencing remains in that statute. This doesn't touch that not in good standing determination that school districts can make. Now this bill is changing it to where any child who's in the custody of the secretary shall be permitted to enroll in and attend a school district anywhere in the state. So to me, that supersedes a school district being able to make a determination of not in good standing for these children. But certainly, if you feel like that needs to be clarified, we could clarify that in the provisions of this bill. But this is granting those children the ability to attend school district and the right to attend school district in any school district of the state.
Yeah, I would have a little bit of concern about that. So yeah, we might need to talk about that a little more. Thank you.
Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of our concerns in our area is the cost of transporting. And I'm familiar from our school that literally we were driving kids across town and to other districts in Johnson County. It was a very expensive proposition, and in places they were using cabs. And when we say anywhere in the state, are we talking 2 or 3 counties over? Is that?
So, yeah, Representative Johnson, yes, for attendance and enrollment purposes, yes. Now, I want to make clear this transportation provision is only specific to a student remaining in the school of origin. So if the student is placed in a district, a separate district or a new school district, but the secretary determines it's in the best interest for that child to remain, let's say, in your district, then your district and the secretary need to collaborate and develop a transportation plan for that student. Now, if the student is placed in a separate district and they're attending in that separate district, well, then they'd fall under this residency provision because they're placed there. But so yeah, the school of origin piece should cover the transportation component. Otherwise, the student would be placed in the district and transportation would be pursuant to current law.
Could I just one more? So that's always going to come out of the school budget and not the DCF budget. Is that correct?
This requires some collaboration between the two. So the secretary, the DCF is also going to need to figure out how to, if that student's remaining in that school of origin, and maybe in other cases too, figure out how to get that child to and from school.
Thank you.
Representative McDonald, I saw first.
Thank you. It seems to me like it's not very articulate about what would happen if the secretary and the districts were at an impasse, so that might be a concern. But one thing I was thinking about, sometimes kids in foster care have a lot of complexity. Kids who are in juvenile justice system, for instance, or kids with complex medical issues. Is there some time frame that the district would have to prepare? If someone's a medically fragile child, for instance, I would think you would have to get some service providers lined up. Is that taken into account just in general or in this bill? I don't know how that works.
That's a good question. I mean, the bill says that their enrollment and attendance shall not be denied on the basis of not having educational records, and that the student would have a right to attend school district in any school of the school district of the state. So denying enrollment to give a school district time to prepare, I don't know if that would comply with these provisions of this bill.
I'm not sure I'm saying they would deny enrollment. I think I'm just saying, is there a time, like, you could enroll them but not be ready to receive them yet? I don't know, is that a thing? It's not a legal thing.
Well, I mean, it certainly could be a legal thing. And I don't know how the real world functions, right, in the current status quo of this functions right now. There might be some folks who can speak to kind of how that's happening right now or what's happening right now, but I mean, under this bill, it's putting a little bit more of an onus on school districts to accept these students.
I just can see some concern about liability for districts if they're unprepared to, physically or medically handle a child who they have to receive. So surely the secretary would intervene to help with that. I'm not sure.
Representative McNorton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Nick, can you explain this transportation plan again? I'm confused on, we're talking school of origin, so if a child is in my district and they get transferred to another district by DCF I'm confused when it says that a child interests remain in a school of origin, because if he's already in my district and lives there, we have to transport him by law. So I'm confused on where if you could go through that again, I guess.
Yeah, so if a child's in your district currently and then gets transferred and resides with a foster family or is placed in the district by the secretary, and then the placement changes to a different school district, let's say an adjacent school district, and the secretary determines that it's in the child's best interest to remain going to school in your district, to keep that child's placement the exact same for school purposes. Your school district, and I think the other school district and the secretary the affected school district and the secretary, they need to coordinate to develop a transportation plan for that child, to get that child to and from school. So then that transportation plan would be developed to get that child from where they're placed in the adjacent school district to the school that they had been attending within your district.
So that goes back to Representative Johnson's question. If they get transferred to Manhattan from Topeka, one of those school districts might be responsible for transportation.
Certainly. But at some point in time, the secretary is going to make a determination that an hour drive plus is not in the best interests of the child so that most likely the secretary would make a decision that it'd be in the best interest for the child to go to school in the school district where they are placed, rather than being stuck in a Uber or a bus for 2 hours a day.
Thank you.
Representative Estes.
Thank you. Nick, page 4, 17 and 18 line numbers. I thought I heard you say earlier that it's only when staying in the rule of origin, but I think I'm reading line 17 to mean that they could really literally be put in any school?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
And on what page of the bill is school of origin defined, please?
We do not define school of origin. So I think the typical meaning, and there might be some federal law in this area as well, but school of origin, I think, is just the school that the child was attending before their placement changed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Representative Smoy.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Nick. I know we're grilling you today. When it says any school district in the state, does that include the district-run online schools for these kids? Is there a possibility that we're going to be moving them from a brick and mortar to an online?
Oh, so under the open enrollment statutes, we specifically exempt virtual schools from the requirements of open enrollment requirements. So under that provision, they're exempt. It'd be under the 72-3122. Really, it would be determined by the secretary. This is just saying really that they can attend school in the school district where the secretary determines that it is in the best interest of the child. I presume if the secretary determines that virtual school is in the best interest, the secretary would work to get that child enrolled in virtual school.
Okay,
or
thank you.
the contractor or something like that. But this is, I think this is really focused on brick and mortar school districts more than anything.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Brantley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Nick. And this may be, can you clarify for me, I think it used to be a student could be on like a school bus for 60 minutes. I don't know if that's the same anymore, so would that be the same if they were transporting them like from here or from Topeka to Junction City? Is there a certain limit for how far they can go?
No, it's just the school district boundary is really the where the transportation requirement ends.
So if it was 2 hours away, they'd still have to deliver them to that school?
Well, if it's, if they're placed within the school district and they're living, residing, staying within that school district due to a placement by the secretary, they're basically a resident of that school district where they're living, residing, or placed at. So the transportation requirements would kick in if they're 2.5 miles or more away from their school, no matter where they're at. I mean, if they're at the very edge of the school boundary, they need to be transported by the school. Now, for the school of origin piece, that's where that transportation plan comes in if they're going to be retained in the school of origin, but they have been placed across a district boundary or something like that.
Thank you.
But I'm not aware of any limitation on how long a child can be on transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Estes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is there a legal definition of homeless child in the bill? And if so, what page? And if there isn't, is there a definition that exists elsewhere that I could refer to?
He like winked at me. You guys should have seen him back there. It's like, check me out.
I feel like I asked the really hard question on Jeopardy today.
It's in the sub. So yes, we do define homeless child, and for purposes of 72, 3122, and the two statutes that we're amending in Chapter 72 in this bill, we do define homeless child. It's a child who lacks a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence, and whose primary nighttime residence is, and then there's some stipulations there, but there is a definition for homeless child, and that's in 72, 3127, the definition section for. That's not in this bill, but it is defined for purposes of those statutes.
Thank you very much.
Representative Owsley is next, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Nick. And you may not have the answer to this one, but the transportation seems to be in question here. How does this differ from the McKinney-Vento legislation that used to cover this, as far as addressing the transportation needs of the child or student?
Well, so McKinney-Vento is homeless children, and I think we did some amendments to kind of capture and give extra consideration to homeless children and at school attendance a year or two ago. I think the department kind of worked with some amendments on that within these open enrollment statutes. This transportation component is specific to changes of placement by the Secretary of DCF. And so it's very specific for if the Secretary determines that it's in the child's best interest to remain in that school of origin. So again, going back to Representative McNorton's kind of question, if that child's transferred across the district boundary, but it's remaining in the Topeka High School, because they've been there for 3 years and they're going to finish out their final year, the school district needs to figure out a way, and the secretary need to collaborate to develop a transportation plan to keep that child being transported to and from the school of origin.
Which I think is, the impasse, or the potential of an impasse is worthy of consideration. Hopefully it doesn't happen. We don't get into that, but then if I understood correctly on the open enrollment, if the secretary deems this kid it's in the best interest for them to attend that district, the district then no longer has the in good standing reasons for lack of acceptance of that student, in your interpretation of it?
I would say with these changes, it'd be hard for the district to deny that student's enrollment. But like Representative Hill said, if there's some thoughts that you would like to clarify that a school district shall not deny a student in the custody of the Secretary for Children and Families for a determination of not a good standing, we could certainly have an amendment to go for that.
And I only raise that, we're not talking about a huge number of students here in the state. But I know when we were discussing the open enrollment, sometimes that one student participating in that one program can, determine we need a new classroom, a new teacher, may not have the physical space. So it opens up that entire debate again. But I'll sit here and listen and try to learn something.
I mean, one thing on that, though, the not in good standing portion is really, it's geared toward those non-resident student application process. And this bill is saying the student shall just be able to attend any school district in the state. But again, if we need to clarify, if there's confusion, if there's question about it, that's what we're here for, is to draft amendments to kind of clear up anything like that.
Yeah, I
appreciate the committee's some, I think we're finding some tension and we're needing some clarity and some details around the transportation piece. And then how does this apply to if a student has some needs that that school cannot address? How do we in statute kind of give some space to allow or give some guidance around that position? I'm going to take a couple more questions and I want to get to our proponent testimony. I think it's a very interesting topic. I wanted everybody to kind of feel how interesting this topic is and detailed it is, and we want to get it right. So Representative Steele and then Representative McNorton, and we'll get to our proponent testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much. So it says in the law on page 2, line 27, if the court or secretary changes, so for the newbie reading over here, secretary meaning a caseworker?
Yes, I mean, essentially, yes.
Okay.
Somebody authorized by the secretary that's working on behalf of the child, yes.
Okay. So the court could remove, but we could have a caseworker say, well, we're just going to keep a kid over here.
I'm not sure how that process would work.
I don't either.
I don't know if I would be the caseworker going against what the court said, but I'm not sure exactly how that process would work in the real world. And maybe some folks behind me who deal with this on a daily basis would be able to speak to that a little better.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Representative McNorton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Nick, anywhere in here, I don't read it myself, any criteria, matrix or something that the DCF has to follow to make this determination? Is there, or is it just a random, somebody thinks it's good and that's what's going to happen?
It's basically the best interest of the child standard is what you'd be looking at. So the secretary would be making that determination based on the best interests of the child.
Is that defined someplace?
That's a common term that is used throughout the sync code and determinations for children who are in the custody of the secretary.
Thank you.
Okay, and we always have access to Nick as we continue to look at this bill and try and make it the best that it can be. I think we understand that it's trying to help a situation for some very vulnerable kids while also giving our districts all the options that they need to be able to serve those kids. And so we're trying to manage that tension. Nick, thank you for the information that you provided. And with that, I would like to bring Angela with KVC to come up for proponent testimony, which you have in your packet. If you want to pull it up, looks like this, printed for you today for your, and with that, you may proceed. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Chairman Getz and members of the committee. My name is Angela Hedrick. I'm Vice President of Operations for KVC Kansas. We are contracted with DCF to provide foster care, case management, and catchment areas 3 and 6, which cover Johnson, Douglas, Shawnee, and then several surrounding rural counties. We are also a child placing agency, an outpatient behavioral health services provider, and a residential treatment provider. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here to provide proponent testimony for HB 2320. In my role at KVC, I oversee our admissions department, which is responsible for matching youth in foster care with placement providers. And it also serves as our centralized call center for after-hours crisis response. I oversee our residential and day services program who serve youth experiencing placement instability. And I also oversee our child placing agency, which provides sponsorship to our foster homes. Despite our system's constant efforts to wrap services and supports around caregivers and children, some youth in foster care continue to face immense instability, including frequent placement changes and disruptions in their education. At KVC, to provide some insight into the efforts that we are making on a daily basis to try to increased stability for youth, placement stability, and educational stability. Our vice presidents and director level leadership meet twice a week to discuss in detail all youth who are experiencing placement instability. We're constantly assessing options for these youth to develop a plan that would allow for stability in their care. This includes kinship exploration, non-related connections, previous placement providers, possible new placement providers, and then we explore any creative solutions where a combination of caregivers could work together to share the responsibility and use everyone's strengths to meet the needs of the youth involved. We're closely examining the circumstances of foster parents who have previously only been able or willing to commit to short-term placement, to see if we can get creative and bust through barriers and develop a support plan that might shift their willingness or ability to become a long-term placement provider for youth. If it's determined that they truly are not able to shift and become a long-term placement provider, we're assessing options to pair these foster homes with foster parents who are able to provide long-term placement for these youth, allowing these short-term placement providers to shift and become a support for another family who's a long-term placement provider, rather than continuing the cycle of short-term placements for youth in foster care. And I'm sharing this to demonstrate the bigger picture goal that we have in shifting this work and moving away from the short-term placements that youth have had to experience. This is a significant culture shift. It's going to be very, very time-consuming, and it's going to take a significant amount of time to see positive results, but it's something that we're working on daily. Until long-term placement is secured, high acuity youth are matched with short-term placement providers, and then KVC is providing daytime supervision. We've modified our residential program to provide daytime supervision for these youth. And then we're simultaneously continuing to search for and match youth with a long-term placement provider. As of December 10th, 2016, children awaiting foster care placement was removed from the definition of homeless children and youth in the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. Because of this, schools require foster care case management providers to provide proof of address or a placement agreement to enroll youth in school. For youth who do not yet have a long-term placement provider, this is a significant disruption to their educational services. House Bill 2320 would allow youth without a long-term placement agreement to enroll in school, continue their education services, maintain connections with peers and caring adults, which is also going to increase the likelihood that we can secure a long-term placement for them. If the placement providers that are potentially interested in caring for these youth and taking long-term placement know that they have some educational stability, it increases the likelihood that they can commit to bringing them into their home and providing for the other care, mental health and behavioral health needs that these youth might have. Regarding the delay, a potential delay in enrollment so that a school has time to prepare, I certainly understand the need for something like that, but I think that we need to consider the reality of what would happen and who would take responsibility for that youth during that kind of gap in time. Would it be the foster parent that we're asking to take off work, or would it be the youth sitting in a day services program provided by the foster care case management provider? Ideally, we would go ahead and have the youth enroll in school, and while the school may not be ready on day one to fully implement all of the services that are needed, they would use that time to spend time with the student, learn about the student, get to know them, and use that as part of their planning for what services might need to be implemented. And so that would be our hope. And then I also wanted to share that transportation arrangements is something that we're already working with schools on through the best interest determination process. When we when a youth has to change placements, we participate in a best interest determination meeting with the school district and make a decision based on the best interest of that student. What school district, should they remain in the current school district, or is it in their best interest to transfer? And then depending on what the decision is, we are working with the school districts to develop a transportation plan. So that is something that we're already doing, we're familiar with, and I also just want to emphasize that we are interested in these changes primarily for the youth that have unstable placement, and we're working to actively to reduce that. We feel like this will help in that effort. We are not seeking unnecessary school transfers. We want there to be educational stability just like placement stability. So we are not seeking any unnecessary school transfers. So I'd be happy to stand for questions.
I have one from Representative Estes first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I love what you're trying to do and put the child first, and foster care children, I think, need to be put first more than many, many other students. But it's complicated because you're in an if-then situation, and we think here in a very binary language in law. And so I just want to share some of the things that you and I talked about outside that are concerns for me. I appreciate that you have the district court language, but I don't think that it's strong enough, because I do know that there are times the judges want a child removed out of that original home school for various reasons. And then there are times that once a child is moved, they see a reason to move them. They don't like the influences that are around that child, and for that child's best interest, they want to move them. And I know sometimes what DCF thinks is in the best interest and what the judges think in direct best interest is different, and I want to listen to both of them. That's one concern I have. The transportation is another. I think there's a reasonable distance, and that amount is probably different between a rural and an urban area, and you may not have a lot of choices in those situations, and sometimes we unfortunately do have to move a child very far. So those are a few things that I'm concerned about, and one other isn't really touched on in this bill, but it's why I love the spirit of this bill, that sometimes a child is sent to a district, they are out of spaces in a class that is comparable to what the child took in their previous school, and they may be in basic algebra or pre-algebra and get stuck in a calculus class, and judges are having to order a change. And I would love it if this bill had language that said, you've got to get this kid in the same class as much as humanly possible, which drives us back to the if-then situation, because that's not always possible. So this is a very challenging way to try to figure out how do we word the right thing to do, and good luck.
Do you have any response for that? I'll give you some space.
Yes, Chair. Thank you. I appreciate all of that feedback and those thoughts. I think that with regard to having the ability to order, for judges to order a youth to maybe not attend a certain district, I think there's room for discussion about what sort of a amendment could be possible there. I think that we would want to be careful about moving the child doesn't necessarily change the problem. So we would want to be careful about what is the goal that we're trying to achieve, and but I think there's room for discussion around that. I think that ability to enroll in a youth in DCF custody in a district without a placement agreement is one of our primary goals, to reduce the number of youth who are without a current educational service being provided. And so I think taking that concern into consideration, and there might be room to come up with some language that would address that. We also would agree with language around schools being held responsible for placing youth in coursework that is appropriate for where they are at in their educational journey. We would certainly support that. And there was one other, the transportation piece. We are currently having it based on a youth's best interest has, I think, naturally resolved quite a bit of that. So I think there's room to discuss if there's language changes that might need to occur. But what we're seeing is that by having the decision-making process be based on the child's best interest, concern about significant distance sort of naturally resolves itself. And then in situations where transportation is needed, we are able to come to an agreement with the school district and develop a plan that seems amenable to everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Good points, good questions. Representative Steele.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the information. It provided a lot of clarity from someone who's on the front lines of it every day. How many cases is approximately is KVC currently, do you currently have?
So that's a great question. I don't want to misquote, but I want to say it's approximately 1,400 youth in out-of-home care.
So of those 1,400, how many of them are dealing with this transportation issue? What I'm trying to figure out is this just an outlier, or is this, when you're looking at a bell curve, the chunk of it?
Yeah, I don't have that data off the top of my head, but I would say that it's a smaller number. I know more about the number of youth that are experiencing placement instability. There may be additional youth outside of that have gone through a best interest determination, and they've maybe determined that it does make sense for them to continue in the school of origin, and so a transportation plan is developed. I don't have those numbers off the top of my head, but for the number of youth that are experiencing placement instability, I would say it's approximately 10 to 20 youth, and they, on any given day, that we're working with and trying to develop plans for and achieve stability for. There may be additional youth outside of that have transportation plans developed for them.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Just want to clarify before we go over to Representative Schmoy. So 10 to 20 a day, and on a rotating different, I mean, that adds up to, a lot of instances of this to where clarity would be very important and the right mechanisms to help you with this. But you're talking about 10 to 20 one day, 10 to 20 then different?
No.
Or rollover, because it didn't.
Rollover.
The placement, but that individual does change at some point because it becomes, now they find a placement, and you've got another student in the catch for that 10 to 20 every day. It would be a significant amount of work to try and move that around. I know it sounds like a small number, but then you multiply that times every school day, and it becomes very large.
Correct. And is it okay if yeah, thank you for that comment. And I try to provide a little bit of insight. So when I say 10 to 20 youth that are experiencing placement instability on any given day, those are the youth that we know need to locate long-term placement for. They might have a short-term placement option available. We might be transporting them from their short-term placement in the morning to school if they are enrolled. And then to school, they might go to our day services program until we determine where they are able to go the next night. And so, and then for some of those youth in that group, we locate long-term placement for. But then additional youth are added to the list. And so it ebbs and flows. Sometimes it's a lower number, sometimes it's a higher number. When those youth are without a long-term placement, we are transporting them to school. We have a transportation department and we have on-call staff who share the responsibility. And if the foster home that accepts them short-term isn't able to take them to school or pick them up from school, we take responsibility, take them to school, pick them up. So.
Thank you for that clarity. We'll go to Representative Schmoy.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. All right, so do we currently have foster kids that are enrolled in virtual online schools, or does that fall under best interest? Is there any need for us to clarify in this language that it would be better for brick and mortar or virtual?
Thank you for the question. We do have some youth attending virtual school. It is also, the decision about that is made based on the best interest of the youth. Our preference is always for them to attend brick and mortar if feasible. It makes it more likely that a care provider, a foster parent, is able to accept them into their home. We have very few foster parents who don't work. They're also working, and so having a youth go to school during the day is most likely going to be what's going to be successful for a placement provider. But we do have some youth who are enrolled in virtual school because of their individual specific circumstances. So I don't know if any changes to the language would need to be made to clarify, but our preference is enrollment in brick and mortar. We would like to have the flexibility to enroll in virtual school if that's what's determined to be in the youth's best interest.
Okay, thank you very much.
Representative Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for your work.
Thank you.
I mean, I really appreciate anybody that is involved in the foster care system and the challenges, daily challenges. It's an amazing job. Probably don't always feel like it's an amazing job.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
And I really appreciate the focus on long-term placement. I can't imagine we have ever not focused on long-term placement. I mean, that's pretty much an ongoing thing. I'm trying to kind of get my head around this, so help me walk through this a little bit, because this bill and understanding it's all a little bit difficult. When a child is in short-term placement, are they considered a resident of that district where they are placed?
I would say yes, but a short-term placement could be for just one night.
Sure.
So, but yes, I would say because we issue a placement agreement, even if the foster parent is only able to commit to one overnight, we issue a placement agreement, and that demonstrates that youth is a resident at that address.
Okay, so we have always, a child that is in foster care always has a district of residence.
Yes, yes.
And so the second option would be attending school in a district that they are not residents in, okay? And I understand that as a child is moving maybe between multiple places, the idea is, I think, to start with, when I looked at this bill, it was like, oh, when they move into a new district for residency, we need to make sure they're able to enroll in that district. But that's not really what this bill's about, is it? It's about being able to keep them in a school that they've been attending. And this is harder for me to understand because I live out where districts are 50 miles wide, you know, so, but if, the idea is to be able to give them some stability to be able to continue in the district where they no longer live, but have been attending, is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, and so then we get into how the out-of-district situation works, and in particularly transportation. Okay, that helps me understand because I kept thinking, but now then it brings up another issue with this bill. The way the bill is written, it says any district in the state. Okay, so suddenly you have not only the previous district that they're attending, the district they now live in, but you have any third-party district that they have not been attending. And would you explain to me why that's a necessary component of the bill?
Yeah, I think I could, if I provide some information on our day services program, we utilize we have a licensed residential facility in Kansas City, Kansas, and we've modified the programming at that facility to provide day supervision for youth who don't have a long-term placement. So we might have a youth from Topeka that's originally from Topeka that is without a long-term placement currently, and they would come, we bring them to our Kansas City, Kansas location for day supervision until we are able to locate a long-term placement. So depending on the circumstances, and the Topeka youth is just one example, they could be from Hiawatha or any of our foster care coverage area. So depending on the circumstances, it might make most sense for stability, for the best interest of the youth, for us to enroll that youth while they're attending day services and we're trying to find a long-term placement provider in the Kansas City, Kansas school district. But they're not from Kansas City, Kansas, and they haven't had a placement in Kansas City, Kansas.
It gives you another option, is what you're saying.
Right.
A school district that might make more sense. Something that, and as we work into this bill and the ideas that I almost hesitate to bring this up, but there is the issue of students that are violent or dangerous. And are there other provisions that deal with that, or does this set up so that districts have to take children that are a problem for the security of their and safety of their school?
Yeah, this would serve students in the same way. So if there were safety concerns for students that were residents of the district, that we would want it to be handled in the same, under the same pathway. So there may be youth with behavioral struggles, but we would want residents or non-residents to be, those issues to be dealt with in the same manner that they're dealt with currently.
Thank you so much for answering my question.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm going to do Representative Steele, and then we have Representative Brantley, and then I'm going to give Ms. Fleiter some space, and then if we have more time, we'll follow up and kind of use up our committee time if we need to. But Representative Steele.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The representative that just spoke asked quite a few of the same things where my mind was going. I just need another clarification. Again, on page 2, and maybe you can help me understand, we've got this, the court on line 27, the court or the secretary, But then down on line 34, we talk about the secretary, and I'm concerned about, we have case managers just deciding all of these things and not a judge who might have ruled one way, but now it doesn't matter because the case manager can move around.
Thank you for the question. I might be able to provide some clarification. I'll try and you see if it. So a court would have jurisdiction to remove a youth from a parent if there's a concern for abuse or neglect or a reason to bring a youth into out-of-home care. Once a youth has been removed and is in out-of-home care, in foster care, and the case, DCF refers the case to a case management provider, one of their contracted foster care providers, the case management provider works to make placement decisions for the youth. So our goal is placement stability, and we work to place the youth with someone that they know, first and foremost, a relative or someone that they're maybe are connected to but not biologically related to. But then the case management team is able to make placement decisions. But we're not looking to move children unnecessarily. We have outcomes related to placement stability and wanting to keep youth in the same placement as long as it's in their best interest and safe for them. So I don't know if I'm fully grasping your question, but once the youth is in out-of-home care, the case management provider does have ability to make placement decisions.
Thank you. Thank you.
And what I'm hearing, not overrule the judge,
Correct.
but go along with the judge, the judgment from the courts to be able to then, for next steps from that judgment, because I can see how you kind of read it. It's like, well, the judge says this and the secretary says this. Well, they've got to line up and they've got to work together. So just for clarity around that. Representative Brantley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here today. And maybe you mentioned this earlier, but how many of the foster kids are waiting for long-term placement?
I would estimate we have anywhere between 10 to 20 a day, and that group of kids changes every day because we are able to locate long-term placement for some, but then maybe someone different is kind of added to our list that we're focusing on.
Thank you.
All right, with that, if it's okay, I'm give you a break for a second. Thank you for joining us. Thank you. And appreciate, just some of the flexibility on transportation, on, if we need to, I think we're going to be doing some of that. How soon that's going to happen, because we really want to get this right, but we would love to stay, kind of in contact, and let's keep working on this. I appreciate everybody's work today. Thank you. And with that, we have some neutral testimony from one of our biggest K-12 enthusiasts, Leah Fleiter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I just wanted to point out in neutral testimony that we are neutral on this because we are just pointing out that this bill largely duplicates federal law, the Every Student Succeeds Act, around the education of children in foster care. And so clearly there is work that needs to be done here at the state level, and we are involved in that work every day. And I note in our testimony that we're in a Kansas Educational Stability for Children foster care work group. So there is a lot of collaboration going on, but it does seem like this bill probably mostly duplicates what's already going on at the federal level. And I did provide a super wonky link in my testimony to some guidance from the Department of Education that was issued in November. So we just wanted to point that out in our testimony. I think more detailed questions would probably be better addressed to Dr. Harwood, but I'm happy to stand for questions if you have them.
We have questions, Representative Poskin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I know you're not going to like this question, but, so it duplicates federal law, and the link that you have on here is the Department of Education's guidance that was published in '24. If the Department of Education is abolished, the federal law would stand. Do you have any idea what would happen to the guidance issued by a department that's not?
I'm sorry, I'm not
I
qualified to
told you you
comment.
wouldn't
on
like
it.
that
I'm sorry.
question. But
I'm not an attorney, and I did not stay in a Holiday Inn last night, so I'm sorry. I don't mean to make a joke about it.
yeah, no, I just, as we do in all of our committees with the chaos at the federal level, it makes it hard sometimes to decide what the best route is for the state legislature. So, thank you.
Any other questions around duplication at the federal level? And I'm just glad we're working on it, even if there is some duplication, but we're really working on the process. It's one thing to have a vision statement on the wall in any business, but it's not enacted. Nobody's participating in that good idea that are just words on a wall. Getting them in between the organizations in such a way that they actually work, that's what our goal is. So thank you for your testimony. It's always this one student over here.
I'm so
Representative
sorry,
Steele.
And I don't know if I'm qualified to answer the question.
Actually, but it's not for you.
Oh, okay,
So
good.
I'm so sorry.
I'm going to sit down.
Please. Am I understanding, may I ask a question to Nick?
Nick, is that okay? No, yes, it's okay.
Thank you. Am I understanding that the bill just says that districts will work it out on the transportation? Experience tells me that districts don't always work well together. And is it possible to potentially have language that specifies? Because this to me seems vague. Thank you. Maybe that's a comment. Or point of clarification for future.
Certainly. So yes, this provision in the bill, it's on page 5 of the bill. So this is, the transportation component is specific to the child remaining in the school of origin after their placement is changed. And this would require the affected school district and the secretary to collaborate to provide the transportation. And so there'd be some cost sharing between the case management provider and the district, and some collaboration to get that child to and from that school of origin. So it's not necessarily requiring the districts to collaborate, it's requiring that school district of the school of origin and the secretary of DCF to collaborate together to get that child to and from school.
Representative Owsley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm afraid that maybe in anticipation of getting back down to appropriations at 5 o'clock, we might have forgotten to ask if there was any other oral proponent testimony in the gallery.
There may have been. Sorry, it wasn't on my list, but Rose did tell me to ask and I forgot. Oral proponents, come on up before we get too far. I'm so sorry. I thought it was just KVC, so go ahead.
Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Crystal Hedrick. I am CEO with the Children's Alliance of Kansas. Thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of HB 2320. The Children's Alliance of Kansas is a group of child welfare agencies across the state. There are 18 agencies. All of the foster care case management providers are within our alliance, as well as many CPAs, child placing agencies across the state. This bill really is a really important bill, and I don't want to be redundant on testimony that you've already heard, but I just want to walk through some data to kind of lift up the importance of this bill, even if it may be through some amendments. There are nearly 6,000 kids in foster care in Kansas right now. In the last fiscal year, the average length of time that each of those kids spent in foster care was just over 2 years. So the feds lay out expectations and performance standards for us in Kansas and other states. And all of the members of our alliance work really hard to meet those outcomes, one of which tells us that we should ensure that kids in care experience less than 4.4 placement moves for every 1,000 days in foster care. So if you're doing the math, 1,000 days, which is a wonky place to start for them, but that's just under 3 years. So if you think about a kid that's important to you in your life moving 4.4 times in 3 years, and the significance of that in terms of their educational development, and not to mention just having positive adults in their life and what those relationships might look like with that level of change. So currently in Kansas, 63% of our kids in care meet that standard. The rest have anywhere from 4.5 plus moves. Those kids that you heard about today, the 10 to 20, that's one foster care case management provider. And the others, I believe, have submitted some additional testimony, written only, in regards to this bill. But think about those numbers, too, in terms of the number of kids we're talking about here. Of the kids in foster care, half of them, just under 3,000, are school-aged, automatically require a change in placement when they come into foster care, meaning we're not able to place them in that same district because of there's not enough foster homes in the area, the needs of the child, the size of the sibling group. There's a lot of things that play into that. But that's also something to consider, is that first initial move into foster care is usually a shift in their school setting as well. So is beginning in 2016 when we no longer had those kids eligible through McKinney-Vento, as previously discussed today. And so what that basically required was the foster care providers to ensure that they have proof of address to enroll a kid in school, a placement agreement. We have a placement agreement every time a child goes to a placement in an evening. However, that changes every single day, so when they don't have that long-term placement. So the challenge is when we have kids that have significant mental and behavioral health challenges and behaviors, it's difficult to keep them stable. It's difficult to keep them stable long enough to access mental health care, to access the substance abuse treatment and other levels of treatment that they might need. So education becomes really important in that as well, right? And this is kind of a community systemic space that we're at now around some shared responsibility for these kids. When we talk about transportation and preparation, I think all members of our alliance would really be open to amendments to address that schools have to have some time to prepare to meet the needs of some of these kids. But in the event that they are not in our school setting, they are sitting with case managers who may have 20 or 30 other kids that are also caring for at any given time. And so when we think about the needs of these kids, I would just encourage us to think about how we can walk alongside all of our community's kids and partner in that way. These kids truly are some of the most vulnerable in our state. So far this fiscal year, 244 young adults have exited foster care. Only 95 of them had completed the 12th grade. So to break the generational cycle of abuse and neglect, we must invest in these kids' futures, not just in terms of their family unit, but in their education and the way that we wrap around them as a community. HB 2320 is a critical step towards ensuring that educational stability and connections to positive adults in their lives. So we ask that you support this bill, and I'm happy to stand for questions.
Give Representative Hill a shot at a question.
I'll try to make this quick, and I thank you once again, echo your work with foster care and concern for kids, and really appreciate that. And I think, you know, some of the things that we've talked about today, the need for long-term placement is probably past the power of this committee, but it's eye-opening. It's eye-opening as you talk about that. But the question I have is the previous conferee said that federal law requires districts to accept children. Do you find in real life that that's not true, that we need this law change to facilitate that?
Yeah, I've heard from our members often that schools are not enrolling kids for long periods of time.
Thank you.
When you say a long period of time, example of that, 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months, months? Representative Estes.
I would love for you to elaborate on that. Can you tell me what the pretext is that's offered? Is it the lack of address?
Yes, I think primarily the lack of address and also the transfer of school records. I think I have heard members say that districts aren't willing to accept a child's enrollment in their school until they have access to those educational records. That may be a challenge for kids coming into care as their parent. Maybe they came into care because they were truant. Which, if I may, Chair, there was a question earlier about kids, students in good standing being enrolled in districts. We know that kids that are in foster care are dealing with really, really difficult challenges in their homes. Otherwise, they wouldn't be entering foster care. So to believe that entering foster care, they would be in good standing would probably be a mistake in us making that assumption.
Representative Estes.
Thank you. I wasn't done. When that is happening, do you guys or a guardian ad litem or somebody go to a judge and say to a school district, we want this child enrolled?
I would defer to our other conferee to speak to the specifics regarding their court's experience.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I think we will keep this one in our pocket. There's a possibility we'll work it tomorrow. I'll kind of discuss some things with the committee, see if we have time to do the amendments or even on Monday. But if you have an opinion or some amendments or ways do you want to make this better or ideas of how to move this forward, maybe not just 2 days to get it right, but a few more days to get it right, please give me your suggestions. Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's a critical absent on this. Where's DCF? And serving on the Child Welfare Committee for 5 years now, Vice Chair, we need to know what the primary agency feels because this issue on transportation and et cetera, we need to try to get their information before we could possibly move it out of committee. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for that. I agree. Thank you for your testimony. So sorry I missed you. I had one proponent, but you told me before, so I should have known. I'm a forgetful man, sorry. Committee, thank you for putting up with me. If there's nothing else for the good of the committee, we are adjourned.